The first episode of the Dusk Maiden of Amnesia starts with Momoe Oko, who was seen in the Paranormal Investigation Club. Oko is keeping a small journal. She carries it around with her to write down notes about the unconfirmed reports and ghost stories that pique her attention. She ends up splitting her pencil tip and striking her cat charm. That cat charm begins to move as it searches her bag for a sharpener. Then Oko is mostly talking to herself and composing, and whenever she looks away, something else starts moving. The keychain flies into her face, but she doesn't notice, and her teacup hovers, but she doesn't notice. Finally, she reaches for her tea and notices that it has been moved, and she acknowledges that there's a ghost in the room, which is when Takai enters. Ogi begins telling him that there's a ghost in the room, and from the look on his face, it appears that he already knows Takai attempted to pass via Oko, but something was interfering. In some instances, you can hear Takai speaking to someone other than Oko, but Oko believes he's performing some sort of ritual because apparently random things start to happen to him as well. That's when Kyudie wanders in. They all start talking, and we can hear Kyudie talking to herself, so Oko becomes bamboozled. Thus they begin their investigation concerning the elevator. Some rumors claim that the elevator continues to move even though it's no longer used by the school, and that if it catches you, you'll be sent to the criminal underground. So what happens next? Taji is pushed into it. Yuko is seen whacking Taji. So Kyudie and Okenoki go to the floor where the elevator has stopped to pick up Taji. The episode then returns to the beginning to show what actually occurred. Yuko, it turns out, is the cause of everything. Yuko is the ghost. So basically the entire episode is replayed with Yuko in the picture. It's kind of amusing. She does these sort of things because she's attracted to Takai and only wants to be with him. Takai asks her about her loneliness and why she's doing all this, but since Yuko has no memory of her past, she can't answer his question. Finally, Yuko persuades Sei to touch her breast when the door opens only for Oko and Kyudie to see. Oko, on the other hand, is the only one cannot see Yuko. Then the investigation team gets together and heads to a hill where they discovered Yuko's grave. Oko goes off saying that the person who made this tomb must have adored Yuko, which upsets Yuko, who widens her eyes and kicks over the grave, causing Oko to go insane. Finally, he stated that Yuko is the subject of the first ghost story in the school, and Yuko is the one who has been trying to possess him. And the episode ends at. The second episode begins with Takai explaining how he understood everything. Then he discovers a door that leads to the club room. He looks around, starts mumbling stuff to himself, and out of nowhere, a mirror appears in front of him. Yuko appears and scares him. They both decide to take a stroll around the school. Yuko asks him all sorts of questions. Then suddenly, Taji starts getting a series of visions and memories in his head, along with the dinging of a bell. Despite these visions, Taki continues to walk with her. Yuko tells him that she suffers from amnesia and that she holds no grudges or regrets. Also, she kisses Taki on the forehead so that he is forever marked to her. This means that he will never be able to forget her. Now, Taki asks her if she wants to start tormenting him, and she walks away telling him a story. That's pretty odd. In any case, she tries. Explain that there's a story about a girl who died on school grounds and her body is still at the school, and that the entire campus is tormented. Tai inquires if the story is about her, to which she responds, maybe. He begins to wonder if her body is still alive, and he experiences those visions once more. In one of his visions, a strange voice says no matter what happens, if you stand directly in front of it, don't look over your shoulder, because if you do, the ghost will draw you in and snare you in the mirror forever. So while this voice is saying this, the entire first and second episodes begin to play backward. I think that's a little creepy when you'll go up here in front of the stairs, creepy, and says, you saw it even though I told you not to. She sits there singing and crying, saying that Tai had seen all of her body. Then the episode returns with Tahai exploring the history of the school. He explains that the school was built on top of a mountain where there used to be a grave. Turns out he was reading a book about the school. Weird, right? Then Yuko starts to mess around with. She falls on top of him and asks him to touch her. Then Oko walks in. She tells Tai that Yuko's ghost is trying to kill her, leaving both Tai and Yuko surprised. Oko asks Tai for assistance with her problem, and Tai loses his cool and asks Yuko what to do. Oko, on the other hand, can't see Yuko. All she sees is Tahai speaking to himself. Okay. OGI continues to walk away from the classroom, her charm flying off her hand. The paper turned over to reveal the piece of homework. She has now discovered that the charm is a forgery. When she looks up, she sees the ghost. Honestly, this jump scare got me. Taki tracks her down and grabs her, trying to flee. The music becomes more intense. Hand shit gets real when Teg pulls out the real charm and reveals it to Okay, Nogi, the spirit appears. Yuko says something in a hushed tone, and the episode ends. In this episode, Teg receives which is a request for him to meet the sender, and it has something to do with Yuko. Tahai arrives at the meeting point. As it turns out, the sender is Kitty. Tahai is warned to avoid Yuko by her. She's a cursed ghost who will take Tahai away if he lets his guard down. Tahai recalls Yuko's comments about people seeing her in a different manner. He begins to doubt himself and believes that while he sees Yuko as a pretty girl, she may actually be a beast. As that rains, Yuko appears ahead of Taji. She was waiting for him in the room the entire time anyway. Her clothes get wet from the rain, so the two go to the infirmary to dry off. Yuko is relieved that Ta sees what she sees in the mirror. The mysterious skirted girl then appears and explains the Yuko. She sees petering, dark hair, rotten skin, perverted, scowl, drooping old lady boobs. She dares Tachai to look at Yuko now, and his opinion of her has shifted. Takai is saved by the mysterious girl from the now ugliest hell Yuko, and shows who she really is. She is Kitty. She's a relative of Yuko. She initially saw Yuko as the lovely pale maiden to HCS, but one day she began to see Yuko in her true grotesque form when Yuko catches up to them to Aki, discusses Yuko's dead body with Kitty. The pair flee to a transports Kitty to the location of Yuko's body. She's about to open the stairs. Kitty becomes terrified and runs away to the basement of all. Yuko requests that Taji looks at her, but he's reluctant. She admits that she became much happier when she finally met someone who could see her. She appreciates the time she spent with Taji. Taji prevents Yuko from deciding to leave him and resumes everyday interactions with her. But in order for Taji to better understand Yuko, he needs to get a close look at her skeleton, which Yuko, still completely nude, tries to prevent Ag from doing. Taki enters the basement and sees Kyurie sobbing. He examines Yuko's corpse with her and discovers that her leg is cracked. Kyurie then points to something. It's a temple, which confirms rumors that the school was built on top of a shrine. Kitty begins to have second thoughts about Yuko being haunted as the two rise. Again, things appear to be returning to normal, but Yuko still dislikes Skier. Momo returns to the club room sometime after the past events to share her findings about Yuko's story. It turns out that the school was cursed because it was built over a shrine. So the problem wasn't a wretched girl, but a wretched school. This completely alters everything. Kyurie appears and informs her intention to join their team in the most sorry way possible. In the fourth episode, we get to see that the Paranormal Investigations Club is at the summer training camp. Yuko seems to be watching everyone from afar when the kids are settling in. Momo discovers an old journal and starts reading from it. The journal happened to contain a few striking stories about the guard who used to hear knocking sounds. Things start to get serious at the club. Momo didn't want to leave the area. She wanted to stay behind so she could hear the knocking sounds. Once Ag and Kyurie head out to explore, Kyurie reveals that she sent up this training night to discover the ghost she thought was Yuko. Yuko snatches Taki and gets mad at him for ditching her during the summers. Then Taki touches Yuko's hand. When they all return to the room, they discover that it's locked. Yuko knocks on the door. A stumbling noise comes from the inside. Kitty and Taki runs to enter through the back window, only to discover Momo trying to escape the room. Momo thought that it was a mysterious ghost knocking, so she decided to flee. Then when everyone was attempting to sleep, she sneak out. KDA notices them. Yuko wants to Ahai to assist her in her search for the damned stone. According to the legend, there's a stone in the old school tower that if your name is written on it, you'll be doomed to die, and it appears that they've discovered it today. Sheer horror. He discovers his own name, only for Yuko to confess that it was all a joke at that same moment. Yuko describes how curses are just everyday things that are exaggerated because people are afraid of them. There's no curse knocking noise or stone, only Yuko being crafty and pulling pranks. And now with that, the episode concludes. This episode begins with K-Daw's dialogue asking why, but then you see what appears to be Yuko dressed as a maid. Yes, it's time for the school festival. Taji has seen setting up a haunted house on Yuko's request. After knowing what Taji has been up to, KDA gets mad. So KDA pulls Oko by the wrist, then tries to drag her out, enraged at Takai. She continues walking because she's so enraged that Oko had to scream to get her to stop, and they become lost. Kitty wants to go to the science room to find items to embellish the house with, which is exactly what Oko wants to do, but she's told to stop. Oko tries to explain that going in there is dangerous. Due to the cold-hearted anatomical model, Kitty unlocks the door and Oko shry. As she begins to explain, the story goes that the models go out at night looking for their missing hearts. When the janitor was working at night, he felt the presence of someone behind him. He turns around and comes to know that it was the janitor dies that next morning with his heart cut out after finding the heart. Kitty and Oko look for the heart model, but they aren't able to find it. Somehow the girls manage to get over it. Then Kitty dresses up for some sort of an 80s montage show. After staring at herself in the mirror, Kitty realizes that she looks exactly like Yuko to this. She becomes sad and storms off unknowingly. She walks right into the haunted. Then Yuko asks Kyrie if she hates herself because she looks like her. Kitty starts to yell at her and says that she does not want to look like her because she's dead. Then Kitty runs out of the haunted house and eventually bumps into Tai. She asks Tai why he likes Yuko so much, to which she replies, when it comes to love, I don't care if another person is a ghost. As a result of his response, Kyrie bursts out laughing. Some Kyrie tells herself that what she saw in the room was really not Yuko, but rather what she was afraid of. It was the half of herself that was incapable of loving herself. In the 6th episode, the Paranormal Investigators Club gets to know about a rumor about Akihito, a masked blood-covered beast who murders anyone who stays late at school as penance as the school carnival continues. When Akihito is discovered during the festival, the rumor becomes true. The superstitious students are enraged after a student named Yuko Kitshima complains that she was attacked by Akihito Takai. On the other hand, discovers Kitishima was behind the Akihito story because she wants to eradicate ghost stories because the students bully her because she has the same name as the Grim Rear. Yuko Kadisha mails are heard. San friends that the only way she can prevent Akihito from trying to kill them is to sacrifice Yuko, but they're neurotic and hysterical, choosing to believe that she and Yuko are the same person. The club deters botanical students by having Yuko cover up herself as Akihito, who hunts down the students for offering the incorrect sacrifice. Tends to leave, but not before saying sorry to Yuko for her ordeal. Meanwhile, Momo and Kia leave the bell tower after scaring the superstitious students until Kitty is confronted by the shadow. The episode ends. After that, Taji observes Yuko acting strangely as she unwittingly continues to lash out. Whenever he spends some time with Momo, he tells Kitty about it and she tells him she saw the ghost again, leading him to believe the shadow ghost is the darkened half of Yuko's literal spirit character. Soon after, Tahai, Yuko, and Kyrie are approached by the shadow ghost. The reveals to them that she is the embodiment of Yuko's hatred and the hurtful memory she wished to forget. Denying the truth, Yuko flees towards the Stone of Curse, where Takai eventually finds her. It is clarified that Yuko was offered as a living sacrifice to stop the plague after it was disclosed that it was a memorial stone devoted solely to the townspeople who died in a pestilence 60 years ago. The shadow ghost reappears for the second time, revealing that Yuko was made as a sacrifice against her. Yuko hangs out with Takai the next day, but she is much more silent to Yuko's horror. The shadow ghost acquires her and pushes Tahai down a stairwell. When healed and wrapped in bandages, Tahai returns to the club. He's surprised to see Yuko, who doesn't seem to remember his face. Yuko informs Tei to leave her alone, choosing to believe that she has forgiven him for causing her distress. He comes to the conclusion that whenever Yuko has a traumatic memory, it is removed from her mind and casting into her shadow. Unable to bear noticing Yuko doesn't recognize him, he spends so much time with Mai that he can no longer see. Yuko Kitty confronts him, asking if he's simply going to forget Yuko when she is strangely pushed away from. Take recalls Yuko and his emotions for her. After speaking with Mao and trying to read her logbook about the club, he worries to the club room and pulls Yuko to her favorite spot, telling her about the time they spent together and confessing his love for her. Yuko finally recalls who Taji is and expresses her feelings for him when the shadow ghost appears in the club room. Kyrie discovers an old picture of Yuko and realizes it was the one who pushed her away previously. In an unexpected turn, the shadow ghost asks Kua what she is. The episode ends at that the shadow ghost reaches Kyrie, but is chased away by Mai, who arrives just in time. She tells them about her interaction with Yuko and Taji, but to their surprise, Yuko says she has never met her shadow and is unaware of these school's conundrums. They quickly notice Yuko has preferentially pushed her bad memories back into her shadow. After noticing she has become more obstinate and ashamed than before, Yuko's upset and lonely without Taiji. As the clamp returns home and she has a brief flashback to her, the shadow ghost appears in front of Yuko, disliking her for instilling their bad memories in her and being vehemently jealous that Taji loves her. Taki saves Yuko from the shadowy ghost's attempt to make her remember more of her history. They attempt to flee the school, but Yuko is unable to leave the premises. Taji tries to push Yuko away from her shadow when it tries to grab her, but as a direct consequence, he falls unconscious. Ag awakens to find himself seeing Yuko's through her body. Taki travels back in time to Yuko's life where she resided with her sister Yuriko, Jida's grandmother. Notwithstanding the fact that a plague was mass occurring, the townspeople Yuko proceeded to take care of Ofa, a beautiful girl whose family had been killed by the curse, believing that everything would get better. Ukri, Riko, and Yuko on the other hand overhear a meeting among the sickening town heads, who believe that the pestilence is a punishment from the gods for constructing the school over a destructive shrine to please the gods. The elders intend to surrender a young child and conceal the fact that the child was a victim of the pestilence. Hira, who is compelled to play the role of Vegeta to select a sacrifice, unwittingly chooses Yuko. The enraged elders seize Yuko and toss her into the bird shrine, sealing the entry. Yuko dies peacefully as she bleeds from a fractured leg, and her cries for help go unaddressed. Unwilling to blame anyone for her fate and relieve Thada and Yuko, Riko are safe. This, however, results in the birth of Yuko's shadow, who despises her for not trying to blame anyone, including the elders, for her death, and becomes a ghost with her Ta. He awakens from his fantasy of Yuko's past to discover that very little time has managed to pass in the present. Touching Tai's hand brings back images of her, and Yuko is unable to perceive or hear him. Taji considers giving up but is smacked by Kid for attempting to forget Yuko. Taji gets an idea from Amo to ask Kid to let him view UCA Riko, the school's chairman. While communicating with Yuko through the club's logbook, Yuko tells Taji that she too can see the shadow ghost and the elders who died from insanity after seeing it. Taji uses this information to entice Yuko to see him again by desecrating the club room, which also tends to attract the shadow ghost. Taji tells Yugo's shadow that he saw the history when he touched her, but she confronts him angrily, asking how he can understand her suffering and sorrow too. He admits that watching what transpired to her and being powerless to intervene hurt him a lot. Regardless, he recognizes the ghost Maiden because they are the same girl. He absolutely adores both personas, rationalize and me accepting both their positive and negative memories, later to discloses that also is his grandmother, based on what Yuko told him. Yuko proclaims with joy that her sacrifice was not in desperation because it allowed her to meet. Winter arrives and the club comes to know that Yuko Riko was discovered and properly buried her sister's body. Yuko arranges for Tahai to go on a date around the school while the club room is closed, until the school can relocate the holy site from the basement. Tahai begins to wonder why Yuko is so adamant about this date until he discovers the truth. Her loathing, the regret that kept her spirit on Earth, has been settled and her spirit is passing on to the afterworld. Takai bids farewell to Yuko and smooches her goodbye as they spend their final moments together in the club room. As the new school year begins in the early summer, the club learns that the school's historic building will not be torn down. Tahai enters the club room where Yuko appears, much to his delight, as their last kiss made her regret having to leave him, and she is in his debt. In the last episode, we see that Kidia, exhausted of Yuko's hijinks for scattering more ghost stories among them, confronts her with a sequence of games in which if Yuko fails, she must start behaving. Yuko wins the competition much to Kitty. A chagrined Momoe displays an old letter she discovered containing ghost stories that predate Yuko's enlistment in the Paranormal Investigations Club at the school. The club decides to look into the stories one by one, which results in many amusing and embarrassing brief seconds for everyone. The club discovers that the letter was written in disappearing ink by the Paranormal Investigations Club. After trying to investigate the haunted bath story, Momoe then recognizes that the original Paranormal Investigations Club wrote the stories for fun before becoming the third newspaper club. Takai and the ladies decide to wear yukatas and set off firework displays on the school rooftops that evening, having realized they are just like their predecessors. And that's the end of the video. As always, if you liked what you saw, subscribe to the channel. I'll be uploading a lot of videos just like this, so I'll see you at the next one.